We're good to go.
Okay. It is a pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Elaine Munsch. I did pronounce that right?
Yes, you did, sir. Very good.
Okay. A native of Cleveland, but she spent most of her life down in Louisville, where she is very active with the Derby Rotten Scoundrels, which I love that name, the chapter of Sisters in Crime in Louisville. She has been, it's fascinating, she has been a bookseller for more than years, and she's worked in both large and small bookstores. Currently still works 1 day a week, as we found out, at Barnes and Noble in Louisville. She is the co-editor of Mystery with a Splash of Bourbon, which I think is a great idea. An anthology of bourbon related stories put out by the Derby Rotten Scoundrels. And as E.M. Munsch, she writes the Dash Hammond series, which is set on the shores of Lake Erie. And the latest one, as I understand from the discussion with Brenda, that the latest is has just been released, A Haunting at Marianwood. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is
Okay.
correct.
And she is going to speak to us about the history of women mystery writers. So, without any further delay, Elaine, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. This morning, I started thinking about when did I come up with this idea and why did I think it was a good one? And I'm not sure. Most of the time I can't remember yesterday, so I don't know why I would think, because I've had most of these materials for several years. But as part of my life as a bookseller and a reader, I always have prowled used bookstores and found old books and like to read articles about, the history of this or the first person who did that. And I think that's what came out. And I don't know whether I put it together during the pandemic when I didn't have time to run around and cause trouble, or whether I had been building it up and then after the pandemic, I put it together. But as a bookseller, and all of you know this now, you go into the stores and you'll see a lot of books by a lot of very new authors. What you don't find are the books by the authors that led up to these people. So I'm going to reach back and we're going to start. Some of this you probably know, some of it you don't. And I'd like to say that I have a handout for you. But part of yesterday that I can remember is that all my files for this were corrupted. So I have to recreate things. And then I will, if you are interested, I will send out a list which gives you the authors, the titles I'm talking about, and some of the research material that I used to find this. But without further ado, let's get started.
Elaine, this
Yes.
is Steve again. If you would send those, I know you have my email address, so send it to me or to one of our other members where you have an email address, and we will see that gets circulated around.
I will, sir. And I almost said it to you several days ago before I somehow corrupted the file. And so yesterday I was really kicking myself about several things. But I will get that out to you probably in the next couple of days after I sit down and recreate it.
No hurry. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you all recall your English literature courses, or if you even watch some TV and that, you know that most in the mid to the end of the 1800s, in the days of Dickens and Conan Doyle, most books were first published in magazines in serial form, and then they were collected and then distributed as a book. But a lot of times you had people, and you heard the stories about people waiting to find out what happened to Little Nell and all that, or Sherlock, was he really dead or not? And that is how a lot of these women writers also began. In England or Britain, it's called crime fiction, not mystery, but it is the same thing. And they have the same subgenres, you know, cozies, police procedurals, and all that. All of these books that we now recognize as cozies, mysteries, thrillers, they all began as a sensation novel. That's what they called it. It wasn't called a mystery. Originally, we would think of them as Gothics. I don't know if you prowled bookstores back in the day, but there was always a Gothic section, usually part of romance, but it would bridge into the mystery section. And that's where you have the house on the moor, light in the upstairs window, a woman fleeing whatever peril existed in the house. These elements gradually evolved into what we recognize today as the mystery. There's a puzzle to solve, usually a crime, but it could be big or small. A detective, either professional or amateur, gathers the clues and solves the problem. The presence of the detector became mandatory, whether he or she was a professional or not. Now, everybody knows that Edgar Allan Poe initiated the mystery story or the detective story in 1841 with the Murders in the Rue Morgue. Story being the key word here. The first detective novel was published by an English woman, Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Published in serial form, The Trail of the Serpent appeared in 1861. The detective was a deaf mute who worked for an insurance company. The book consists of a series of letters written by him to his home office. A very nice idea there. Mrs. Braddon followed up with Lady Audley's Secret in 1862 and Aurora Flood in 1863. Not being one to rest, she wrote over 90 novels, as well as 150 short stories and plays. And remember, she did it in longhand. She was known as the Queen of Sensation. She had a working class readership who expected all sorts of things from her. And she worked on several novels at one time and said that the serialization format was very problematic. She called it hand-to-mouth composition. Now, this book, Lady Audley's Secret, has been republished by, I think it's some Random House. Random House, Library of America, Poison Pen, Otto Penzler are some of the publishers who have re-released some of these very old books so that you can consume them and, you know, see what was going on before we got here. So now we've got Mrs. Braddon, and she just kept on writing. Meta Fuller Victor is credited with the first American detective story called The Dead Letter. She published that in 1866. She also wrote under several pseudonyms, the most famous being Seeley Register. As with Braddon, she was a prolific author, writing over 100 novels, as well as editing her husband's magazine for women. No slouch, this Meta. Even though she was the most successful writer of popular fiction around the time of the Civil War, very little is known about her personal life. And this is the Library of Congress, put out by Poison Pen, a copy of her book, The Dead Letter. I'll tell you, I did some research, or tried to do research into the backgrounds of some of these women. And most of the time, there was very little known. In fact, I had a friend who is a member of the Louisville Genealogical Society, and I gave her names and dates and that and said, see what you can find out. And she searched and mainly found, you know, the birth date and the death and possibly marriage. And that was about it. And for these women who worked so hard and really set the precedent for all of us, it's a shame that we don't know more about them. Back to the authors and their stories. In 1878, the Leavenworth case, written by Anna Catherine Green, appeared. Most of you, or a lot of you, have probably heard that name because she is the first person that comes up when you start talking about the history of women crime writers. The book was a tremendous bestseller, and it really changed the game. She had to write the book in secrecy because her father thought genteel young women should only write poetry, no matter how financially successful they were. It took Green 2.5 years to complete the Leavenworth case. The story, along with many of the others that Green later wrote, revolved around the domestic situation. Her concerns for women, either as servants or those being served, were typical for women of Green's status. Some of her characters were uppity, that's my word, not hers, in wanting things they shouldn't. The Leavenworth case introduces veteran detective Ebenezer Grice, who winds up collaborating with Miss Amelia Butterworth, who appears in several of the novels, solving crimes usually associated with greed. That Affair Next Door features both Grice and Butterworth, and it was, again, recently reissued as part of the Library of Congress Crime Classic series published by Poison Pen. At the turn of the 20th century, the sensational novel with its Gothic overtones hit its stride. Mary Roberts Rinehart, sometimes called the American Agatha Christie, authored 16 novels and numerous short stories starting in 1878 and ending in 1953. She started working to shore up the family's finances during troubled times. And that is something that goes through, a thread that runs through a lot of these women that started writing were helping to take care of their family. And this is a little aside, I'll have a few here. When I started book selling in I almost said 1872, no, 1972, her books were still on the shelf. They were paperbacks, 95 cents probably from Dell, Pyramid, Fawcett, one of those, but they were there. So you could pick up and you could read these books. Now, Mary Roberts Rinehart is best known for two staples of the genre, Had I But Known and The Butler Did It. The opening sentence of her most famous novel, the one which made her a household name, it's called The Circular Staircase. This is the opening line. This is the story of how a middle-aged spinster lost her mind, deserted her domestic gods in the city, took a furnished home for the summer out of town, and found herself involved in one of those mysterious crimes that keep our newspapers and detective agencies happy and prosperous. Says it all. Had that middle-aged spinster but known, I'm sure she would have stayed in the city and we wouldn't have had the book. In her novel, The Door, published in 1930, the idea of the butler did it was born, even though those words are not in the book. Between 1909 and 1936, Roberts had the largest number of bestsellers in America. And again, she had called it American Agatha Christie. This is published by Otto Penzler, brought out The Haunted Lady. So if you would like to, you will probably have to order it from the bookstore rather than find it on the shelf, but fingers crossed, you never know. Here's another aside. When I was living in Cleveland, and Cleveland has a tremendous, wonderful library throughout the city. Most of them are Carnegie. I spent a lot of time working downtown, and then I'd go to the downtown library. And I stumbled across a sister writing team from the early 1900s, Constance and Gwyneth Little. They wrote what we would call standalones, 35 books with no recurring characters. And in 1977, Rue Morgue Press started reprinting these books. They weren't widely distributed in bookstores, but the libraries loved them. The mysteries aren't complicated, but humorous. And I found them to be enjoyable tales, quick reads. If you ever see one, pick it up. I think you will enjoy it. And if you're like me, you'll get hooked on it. And I ended up, plowing through all the ones they had at the library up there. Very pleasant time spent with that. Back on track. In April of 1920, Black Mask magazine appeared and was published until 1951. It introduced its readership to an extensive list of mystery suspense authors, most of whom were male. One exception was Catherine Brocklebank, who created one of the first female series characters, Tex of the Border Patrol. Brockleback published 7 stories in Black Mask, earning her a mention in the reference book Hard-Boiled Dames by Bernard Drew. She was born in Pennsylvania in 1877 and died in New Jersey in 1962. And again, that's about all we know. In the 1920s, the golden age of mysteries was born. Okay, and you all know who that brings to mind. Agatha Christie. 2020 was the 100th anniversary of the publication in Great Britain of the first Poirot novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Not only did she create Poirot, she gave us Miss Marple, the world's most famous spinster and amateur detective. Christie wrote 74 novels, 16 plays, the most famous of which is The Mousetrap, which opened in London in 1952 and ran continuously until March 16, 2020, when the pandemic closed the theater. Again, another aside, there is a new movie out called See How They Run with Sam Rockwell in it. And it is, I don't want to say a spoof, but it is humorous take on mysteries and that. It's set in the 1950s, and The Mousetrap, the play, is the backdrop. And Dame Agatha herself, obviously an actress, makes an appearance at the end. I just read Bridget, her comment. It was a very good movie, and I'm planning to go see it again. I just loved it. So back to Agatha Christie. Now, this is a fact. Her books are only outsold by the Bible and Shakespeare's works. If you go into a bookstore, you will find more Agatha Christie books, various titles listed, than anybody else. Well, you can't count Patterson because he has all these little friends that help him out. So if you just take James' books, they're not. One critic wrote that Christie would still be regarded as the greatest mystery author if she'd only written one book, that The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, because it introduced us to the unreliable narrator. Such is her place in the mystery world that an award, the Agatha, is given out each year for the best in cozy mysteries. A contemporary of Christie's, Dorothy L. Sayers, also had a lasting impact on the genre, even though her body of mysteries is less than Christie's. Sayers was educated at Oxford, which was unusual for a woman at that time. Her first book, Whose Body, was published in 1923. In it, she introduced the gentleman sleuth, Lord Peter Wimsey, a member of the aristocracy, ones who had time on their hands to solve crimes. The first case involved Harriet Vane, who helped Wimsey find innocent of murder. This led to romance, and eventually Vane joined Lord Peter in solving crimes. Sayers got a first class in medieval French poetry while at Oxford. When asked which book she considered to be her best work, she chose her translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. She stopped writing crime fiction in 1930, but she made her mark on the field. She died in 1957. Two women who were influenced by Sayers' creation of Lord Peter were Nio Marsh and Marjorie Allingham. Marsh was born in New Zealand in 1895 and worked in the theater there, which runs through her works. She emigrated to England in 1928 after visiting friends there. It is said she got the idea to write a detective story after reading Christie or Sayers. Marsh created Sir Roderick Allen, a member of an old aristocratic family. Like Wimsey, he has an assistant, Inspector Fox, in solving crimes. Also like Wimsey, Allen falls in love with the suspect and eventually marries her. Marjorie Allingham, on the other hand, she created a gentleman sleuth, Albert Campion. It is possible she created him as a parody of Lord Peter. In her first book, The Crime at Black Dudley, Campion has a minor role, but Allingham's American publishers really liked what they read, so she moved Campion to the center stage. Over the 18 books and numerous short stories, Campion matured into a strong character, no longer a shadow of Wimsey. And if you follow any kind of British television, you will see that these books with Albert Campion have been adapted to the small screen many times. Most of the Golden Age stories centered around the country home or small village, containing a cast of characters drawn from the upper crust, with a company of servants to add to the list of suspects. Yeah, you really had to have a butler because we all know he did it. Very formulaic clues needed to be sprinkled throughout the book so the reader might solve the puzzle along with the detective, be he or she amateur or professional. These very genteel books are the precursor to today's cozies, which you all know is a very, very fast-selling subgenre. But in the 1940s, a seismic shift in detective fiction took place. The hard-boiled detective was born, birthed by Hammett and Chandler. Gritty, solitary characters and stories. As has been said, crime came out of the drawing room and into the mean streets where it belonged. The language was coarser and the blood on the pages more prevalent. The 40s and 50s also brought a variety of new vistas for writers to explore. World War II saw many of the home front women stepping away from the stove and into jobs once held by men who were off fighting for our freedom. The end of the war meant thousands of soldiers returning home to get reacquainted with their wives and families. They stepped into a whole new world. Some had psychological problems which muddied these relationships even more. The successful women writers studied this and used these problems as a basis for their works. The Library of America publishes books celebrating American writers, whether they write fiction, poetry, or nonfiction. Those are the black hardcover volumes, well, some are paperback, that you see on the shelves, and they'll sometimes are one author and sometimes are, a variety. In 2015, the Library of America published 2 volumes to celebrate women writers of the 40s and 50s. The 1940 volume contains Vera Caspari's Laura, published in 1943 and made into that memorable movie. Helen Eustace's The Horizontal Man, a college mystery about a womanizing professor. Dorothy B. Hughes, In a Lonely Place, is accorded the twin honor of being a great serial killer novel as well as a great Los Angeles novel. Elizabeth Holding's The Blank Wall, published in 1947, studies the World War II home front, a different kind of family. Lucia Holly, wife and mother, faces a crisis with her teenage daughter and an unsavory boyfriend. Lucia finds herself with the challenge of what to do with the corpse. Her mission is to protect her family while her husband is off fighting the war. Lucia just tells herself, I can do this. The 1950 volume contains Mischief by Charlotte Armstrong, who I remember best as an author of many Gothic paperbacks. Again, shelves were lined with her books back in 1972. Mischief is the story of parents picking the wrong babysitter. Talk about a nightmare. She has been forgotten over the last 20 years or so. It's really quite a shame. And I thought I had a book of hers here, but I don't see it. So here's one. This is The Chocolate Cobweb, and this was published by Penzler. So if you go onto his website or Mysterious Bookshop's website, you can find some of these. Patricia Highsmith, now we all know her as the author of The Talented Mr. Ripley. Within the 1950 volume, she has her novel, The Blunderer. This is her tale of 2 husbands accused of killing their wives and the police officers who pursued them. Obviously, Highsmith is known for her psychological novels, and they're all definitely what you would call noir. So she's back into the 40s there. Margaret Millar, Beast in the View, won an Edgar for the best novel, and that's included in this collection. She wrote 3 different series, but each only had 3 titles in them. She was prolific with her standalone books, 14 Mysteries and many other novels. She published books from 1944 till 1986. She was the wife of Ross MacDonald, creator of the Lou Archer series. So you can imagine the dinner conversation those 2 had, how and why to kill somebody and how to get away with it. Fool's Gold by Dolores Hitchens rounds out this 50s volume. Hitchens was a high-volume author of police procedurals, private eye novels, and suspense novels. Here's the thing you need to remember. Writing as D.B. Olson, Hitchens has the curious honor of creating the cat cozy. When you see one of those covers with the cute little cat, dog, or other cuddly creature, remember D.B. Olson. But and this is interesting that it's published under Dolores Hitchens, The Cat Saw Murder, is one of the books that has been recently reissued. Going in another direction from the noir of psychological or psychological books of this time period, one woman, Georgiana Ann Randolph, took up the pen and published under the name of Craig Rice. Her books are noted for their humor and wackiness. She was called the Dorothy Parker of detective fiction because of her wit. Her protagonist, one John J. Malone, the most disreputable lawyer, provided laughs and garnered many sales for Rice. I have an old copy of her book, Eight Faces of Three, and this was published a long time ago by International Polygonics. I think some of you might know Jeffrey Marks, that's how he publishes, but he wrote a biography of Craig Rice entitled "Who Was That Lady?" He won, I believe, an Anthony for it. And he's also written one about Earl Stanley Gardner, and he was writing another one the last time I heard from him, but it's been a while. Again, another aside, if you can ever find this movie, this one just cracks me up. On Turner Classic Movie, I stumbled onto a movie called, in black and white, which I love, Mrs. O'Malley and Mr. Malone, starring James Whitmore and Marjorie Main. It is hilarious. And the dialogue is just wonderful. And I think that's, one of Rice's strong points. For all her efforts, Rice became the first mystery writer and the first woman mystery writer to appear on the cover of Time magazine, January 28th, 1946. Now we're going to tiptoe into the 1960s. Emma Lathan is the pen name of Mary Jane Lastis and Martha Hannestart. They created John Putnam Thatcher and wrote 24 books featuring the detective and banker. Now we're going away from some of the police officers and into the different fields that we now have out there. Ruth Rendell introduced us to Inspector Wexford. They are obviously police procedurals, but as writing as Barbara Vine, she wrote many psychological, very dark mysteries. Del Shannon, the pen name for Elizabeth Lennington, introduced us to Mexican-American homicide detective Louis Mendoza. Published in 1960, Case Pending takes the reader inside the precinct. 30 books later, excuse me, Shannon was crowned the queen of police procedurals. Since her books would be scrutinized by law enforcement readers, she made sure she got all the details right. And again, Poison Pen has reissued Case Pending. So if you would like to, if you write police procedures, you might want to see the lady who really put her stamp on it. Crossing the pond, otherwise known as the Atlantic Ocean, we encounter T.D. James. She published her first book, Cover Her Face, in 1962. In my estimation, she is one of the best writers. She took the English language and elevated it. And so her mysteries are what I really call literary mysteries. Unlike myself, who I would not call mine literary, I call them fun. But she started writing to help support her family. She would get up before dawn and write until she had to go to work at her full-time job. Hats off to these ladies that did that. I would love to support my family with my writing, but we would have all died of starvation. I would have never finished the first page. She created Adam Dalgliesh, the detective who preferred poetry to murder. And in 1972, she published An Unsuitable Job for a Woman. The title says it all. That's the way the public felt about women in law enforcement and either as private detectives or police officers. Cordelia Gray, the woman who has the unsuitable job, inherits a private inquiry firm from her partner and has to prove that she is worthy. James only wrote 2 books with Gray as the central character, but they made a huge impact on the field. In 2009, Dane James published Talking About Fiction, detective fiction, and that is published by Random House. Pick it up if you have a chance. It's one of those reference books you ought to read through and see what one of the mistresses of and one of the top writers has to say about the whole genre. Okay, so P.D. James nudged the door open with Cordelia Gray, who may or may not fit the strict definition of a hard-boiled detective, but she wasn't Miss Marple for sure. Now we're going to swing all the way across to the west coast of the United States, where we find Marcia Muller birthing Sharon McCone. Definitely a female detective not to be taken lightly. In 1977, saw the first in a long series of McCone titles, Edwin of the Iron Shoes, set in San Francisco. This is not the first one. This is one of many, and she is one of the few writers, besides Agatha Christie, who are still, you can still find them on the shelf, and she is still publishing. She has been called the mother of all of us female writers. She's my age or a year or two younger, so she's more like the grandmother of the current crop of mystery writers who feature tough, independent-minded women as the detective. These detectives are professional through and through, real women doing real jobs, giving and taking a punch with the best of them. Not only did she write the McCone series, but many, many other books, and collaborated on anthologies and reference books. She's married to Bill Pronzini, the prolific mystery writer. I believe this is the no-name detective, and they even have books where the no-name meets Sharon. So very interesting. Now we're going to jump from the West Coast to Chicago. And we all know this name, Sarah Paretsky. She created V.I. Warshawski, who is based in nitty-gritty Chicago. A lot or most of her books made it to the bestseller list, proving women can do it as well as any male author. And we all know that she founded Sisters in Crime, along with several other writers, because she felt that the playing field was not level. And I think she righted that ship a bit at least. Paretsky pursues a social justice agenda and is still fighting and publishing today. Mysteries of crime fiction have branched out in many directions. The country house murders of Christie and Sayers led to an explosion of cozies where the violence is off stage. Today, these books are quite profitable. The sleuth is usually a woman who has a friend with a professional policing knowledge and skills. Arrest can be made without Gomer Pyle running down the street yelling, "Citizens arrest, citizens arrest." So now we have women creating strong professional women detectives, strong women in other fields, legal, medical. Problems, AKA crimes, are solved, justice served, and readers cry for more. I'm going to end now excuse me, with a nod to Kentucky's own Sue Grafton. I can't do this without crying. Born in Louisville in 1940, she published A is for Alibi in 1982, setting the goal of writing 26 books following the alphabet. She worked tirelessly until her death in 2017. Her books went straight to the bestseller list. Her detective, Kinsey Milhone, has breasts that never sang, a waistline that never grew, and knees that never faltered. If only we could be. Well, thank you for listening to my rambles. My suggestion is to go out and find some of these books, prowl those used bookstores for all these books that you're not going to find in the new ones, and enjoy them and take a little lesson from history and say, okay, these are the bricks upon which our foundation has been built. So thank you very much for having me. And if you're looking for a fun read, shortly, A Haunting at Marianwood should be out. And I don't know if it'll be in your bookstore or not. It should be available. They can order it through Ingram. So tell them Elaine sent you and she insists that you order it for her. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Elaine. Great program. If I can add two little points, one is discussing the historical novels brought me to mind that, just about a month ago, I pulled off for the first time an Earl Stanley Gardner, the first book he wrote, the first Perry Mason book. And it was a delight. It's really different than the TV show. It's much harder edged, and Perry's a much tougher customer, and it was fun. And I'm going to read some more of those. The other thing was with regard to Sue Grafton. And I mentioned this when we did a presentation in Bluffton this week. One of the most interesting things about her, because she had a background in screenwriting and she had written and had exposure to Hollywood. And I remember reading the comment that when she passed away, that she had told her children that if they ever allowed a movie or a television series to be made of the alphabet murder books, that she would come back and haunt them.
Well, tacking on to that is that I heard at the last mystery group meeting that we had, we start off discussing a book and then we are all over the place. Someone was telling me that they read that her children are going against her will and they're going to try and sell it, or they're going to sell it. And it's going to be grabbed up in an instant.
Oh, yeah, they won't have any trouble selling it. That's a shame if they do.
Yeah, we need to boycott that. So they don't make any, but anyway, I'll stop because I start rambling and then you'll never be able to shut me up.
Okay, well, it was great. If we have any questions, feel free to hit the unmute button and ask a question.
I just like to jump in and say hello. And I'm still in touch with Les Roberts. And I don't want the people here to know that he thinks so highly of you. And when he was recommending that I start writing mysteries, and I was asking about Sisters in Crime, he talked about you.
Well, Les is just a sweetheart of a man. I met him when I was living in Cleveland, and he was writing in Cleveland, and he set his series in Cleveland, which was the first one to be set in Cleveland. But when I moved to Louisville, I got a phone call from Laurel Anderson, who was in charge of the Sisters in Crime down there. Actually, at that time, it was based in Lexington and covered the Ohio Valley. It was called the Ohio River Valley. And she called and she said, Les Roberts thinks you should join Sisters in Crime. And I did, and it's been the best experience ever. I have met the nicest people, wonderful authors. I have been pushed by my chapter into writing because, Brenda was around back in the days when she belonged to our chapter. And I would write the first sentence, I would write the first paragraph, and everybody, oh, this is really good. And I got, yeah, that's good, we'll go on. And then at one point, they said, okay, enough is enough. You have got to write more than, one page. And they bullied me into writing the rest of it. And that became the first book. And I actually had so much fun with it. I thought, I waited this long. I should have, of course, my husband had passed away. I was retired. I actually had time, which is the big factor for everybody, I think.
Well, you were always the first line queen of any book or work.
Yeah.
For anyone who has not noticed, take a look in the chat at Eugenia Parrish's remark. Eugenia, that is it's fascinating. But she wrote, for those who hadn't seen it, I had a friend who loved Travis McGee books, so I handed him a Kinsey book. He handed it back and said, I never read books by lady authors. It's pretty stunning.
Could I say, Elaine, this is so wonderful because you put kind of in order a lot of this history, and my wife inherited from her mom her entire library, which is about 9,000 books, most of them mysteries. And a lot of these ladies are in her library. but I had no idea this context. So this is really nice to put some of these authors in order, because we have some of these early histories and they're probably not, some of them are really old and some of them are more recent reprints, but this is great. So we know like what to keep and what to organize and how to put all this stuff together. It's really awesome. Thank you.
I really appreciated the reference to P.D. James' book. I think it's called, is it on, the title is On Mystery Writing or On Detective Fiction?
Talking about detective fiction.
It's a wonderful book, and anybody who is interested in this at all should, it's not a very big book. In fact, it is actually mostly an edited transcription of her lectures at, I think, Cambridge. And it's not a long book, it's not complicated, but it's just like today's talk. It just opens your eyes about the history of mystery writing.
I was looking up quotes by P.D. James, and I copied this one down. Again, the cat ate all my notes before, so I had to reinvent this speech here. But P.D. James says, "When I heard Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, I thought, did he fall or was he pushed?" Now there's a lady who's going to tell a story. So
if there are no more questions, we just really want to thank you. It was a great presentation. I think everyone has enjoyed this. Everyone has learned something about this. And just thank you tremendously for being part of this. And I'm going to send you an email asking for your address so that we can send you a small token of our group's appreciation for your presentation today.
is it something one can drink?
And well, it is up to you how you choose to use it. But
No,
we need to organize an event between our club, our chapter, and your chapter. And I'm sitting here looking at a couple of my bottles of choice bourbon. So,
but you know, it's interesting because I talk a lot about drinking, but I don't drink. In fact, one time I was one of the bookstores I was working at in Cleveland, and there was I'm a hippie. I mean, I'm from that hippie era, but this lady was really a hippie. Anyway, she came up to me one day and she said, "Do you have a problem? You seem to talk an awful lot about drinking." And I said, "I don't have a problem yet, but if you keep bothering me, I will start drinking and then I'll have a problem."
The one thing that bourbon in Kentucky is interesting because it is as much about the making of it as it is about the drinking of it in Kentucky. And the last I heard, there was half a barrel, not half a bottle, half a barrel of bourbon in storage in Kentucky for every man, woman, and child who lives there. So you gotta take your fair share of it.
Yes. It when we started the Bourbon Anthology, and that was almost 15, 16 or more years ago. It was before my husband passed away, and he's been dead 15 years. Our chapter started this, and it just got lost. And a couple of years ago, well, probably about 4 years ago, one of the members came up to me and she said, and I don't know why I was the chosen person, but she said, "It is your responsibility to make sure this gets published." And I said, "Really?" And I thought, she must know the Catholic background, the Catholic guilt. You signed on for something. So I started, and I had to go through obituaries to find some of the authors who had passed away, had to find their families so that we could get, sign off on contracts. And Susan Bell, who was the co-editor, we put this together. And it, because in Kentucky and bourbon, it just exploded. So we had so many outlets that we could reach. And then the book was published, and guess what happened? The pandemic shut the whole freaking country down, not only Kentucky. So we had to sit on the books for well over a year. And then we started out, and I'm driving to Heaven Hill, I'm driving to Old Forester, with this book. And we've been very, very successful with it. So I'm pleased. But every once in a while, I keep thinking, you know, we should do another anthology. I am in awe of your chapter doing so many anthologies. I mean, you have it down. And I would really like to explore that with my chapter, most of them that are in there. And I think we may have 15 members at the most. Most of them are unpublished, just, you know, interested in mysteries, struggling, starting to write. And I'm thinking that this would be, you know, an anthology is a good way to get your foot in the door. And at least you can say, I've got something published.
I think we should cooperate. Our two chapters should get together now that the pandemic seems behind us. But I will say, I have to give Hawthorne credit for this, because we did have an anthology titled Murder 2020, which was planned in advance. But the great tagline for the promotion of the event came from Hawthorne, who said, looking back, murder was inevitable. So again, thank you so much. Hopefully we look forward to doing some more joint projects with the Derby Rotten Scoundrels.
I will encourage them to do it. And if not, I'll be the one that shows up. So we'll
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great afternoon. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.